So, for the next part of this lecture series on the world's midnight, we've been using Percy Shelley as a lodestar for this journey into the abyss, very much so in the way that Dante journeys through the gates of hell with Virgil. And this is an apt metaphor for our next movement, because it is a movement very much so what we've been doing, like Heidegger's movement with Hölderlin. And what the poet or the poetry of freedom reveals in regards to, we could say, Eros and civilization, or civilization and its discontents, specifically regarding how energy moves through gates in a society or civil structure or a social order, regardless of scale, whether that's tribal, local, communal, national, global. Because we are looking at a convergence of human desire and thermodynamics, as we have discussed quite thoroughly at this point, not only in the law of being itself, but of the persistence architecture of the universe. That each substrate at every scale has its own, let's say, unique constraint situation. And it is solving for constraint within its sphere of influence, whether that's a cell or a human being or a star. And again, right, there is configurational persistence and there's regulational persistence. So I want to dig into this a little bit here in terms of the gate structures of civilization. This is a collective glue through which a network of transfusing or transmitting or transmissing information is passing. So there are many different gates to control this energy, right? Because you're talking about a series of organisms, right, which have their own gates, which are their organ systems, their metabolisms, and their nervous systems, within a larger symbolic order, which is the social structure. And that social structure needs to be a symbolic order to collectively regulate those nervous systems, and thus regulate the drives and actions within that network, that extended social network of energetic production and consumption. Because that is a grid, as we understand in global industrial modernity, that is a grid of food, water, production, distribution, sexual reproduction, information. These are all channels through which energetic material passes. This is deeply related to Claude Shannon's work, because we're talking about the real manifestation of thermonuclear information in the cosmos, as in specific forms. And here we could take the human genome as a primary example. The human genome is here to execute a series of commands, as in the continuation of the human species or the expression of the genetic potential of the human being. And therein, it is functioning within a world order, which is to say the possible transfusion, transmission, transfluence of information within the existing historical period of time. So this is to say information is transmitted radically differently in the internet age than in perhaps the age of the Industrial Revolution or early feudal England or the Neanderthal. This is a limitation. It's an energetic restriction, which is either made available or not made available based on technological revolution, which condenses and compresses space and time into traversable territory, whether that's symbolic information of language or physical information of the transmission of the human genome. So the civilization itself is the attempted structure of civil or social governance, which is fundamentally and primarily symbolic in terms of the law. This is the gate which is presupposed through which certain people can and cannot pass, and why. and therein how much of each individual architecture, right, whether that architecture is schizophrenic, whether that architecture is highly literate, it's a matter of behavior which is manifest within space and time. So the seeking to express the human being is the origin and source of all action. We could say that is the desire to know oneself, or the desire to become oneself, to express the latent energetic and genomic potential of the individual in space and in time. This is the ongoing project of each organism, and whether that's as simple as sexual reproduction or the formation of a new global cosmogony, these are attempts at expressing the latent potentiality of the human being, the expression of the literal energetic potential of the human genome in each iteration and in each moment in time. And this, of course, is a time-bound phenomenon in which the human being remains viable, which is to say viable to think, viable to have sexual intercourse, viable to breathe and have organ function, because this is a architecture of energetic escape, as is all things in the universe at all scales, a pseudo-closed system that is leaking and dispersing energetic potential and heat into a new formulation, whatever that may be, configurational or persistence-based. So civilization exists in a moment in time, as a moment in time, as a collective symbolic order of relation, which is to say what behavior is allowed or not allowed at any given moment in time, and the creation of symbols, markers, which suggest that certain behaviors are and are not allowed at any given moment in time. And this is what prevents what is historically understood as a descent into predictable human chaos, which is to say the wild and radical expression of all human desires at any given moment in time. And here is where I bring in Percy Shelley, particularly his arguments not only on atheism, which is the argument towards scientific rationalism, which is to understand and to know via the scientific method, as opposed to enforce coercive belief systems and belief structures, to know via rational inquiry into the nature of being. But also his views on a governance structure as well as marriage, because these are two things that are intertwined. The human being is navigating, again, this persistent structure, or this constraint structure, which is the lived experience of being in a rapidly degrading corporeal form, which is dependent upon the function of several different interrelated systems: nervous, organ, circulatory, synaptic, hormonal, to communicate, express, and convene on the situation and relationship between self and world, which is the human experience, however long and however heightened and then degraded in and through time. And this situation, of course, fundamentally is insoluble because the situation ends in decoupling. And there are a variety of different belief systems and structures about what happens after that decoupling to the consciousness that is inhabiting or dwelling within that form. My suggestion is that the consciousness that is dwelling within that form is inseparable from the form itself, because it's a configurational structure based both on nervous system capacity as well as genomic history, and those two things are fundamentally interrelated. And so to navigate this situation, the human being is always already in a state of existential crisis, being thrown, as Heidegger would say, into a situation which is perennial. It is outside of history insofar as the human species or the experience of self-referential consciousness is outside of history. It is outside of history in the sense that to be faced with one's own mortality, as Ernest Becker suggests, is a cosmological problem. It's a problem of the human being in relationship to the universe, which is, as the operator identity suggests, the question of and the problem of being, which is persistence under constraint at all scales. The star, the symbol, the human being, the cell, and even the stone as a highly configured low-resolution persistence mechanism. And of course, what we know of the great human civilizations or expressions that lie outside of our valence of civilizational histories, written histories, resides in stone, primarily. Because stone persists far beyond not only the individual singular human lifespan, but the lifespan of entire civilizational orders and linguistic constructs, which again are symbolic mechanisms. So to hone in specifically here on language as the code of order, the regulatory gate structure code of order, it is a symbolic system or a symbolic order which is inscribed, even insofar as the Western canon is concerned, inscribed in stone, as in the Ten Commandments as a fantastic example, or the Code of Hammurabi, to create a fundamental underlying law of behavior, an energetic system of behavior, which regulates the collective organ, the expression, production, and consumption of energy within the human grid insofar as it exists locally or globally. This is a span of influence, and this is precisely what the history of empires is. It's expanding and contracting the span of a civilizational influence, which is the valence of a political, social, moral, and linguistic code of being and behavior, which is ultimately religious and fundamentally, ultimately cosmological, as in the understanding of a way of being in the cosmos, which then is the conference of resource, coordination, competition, territory, reproduction, aggression, so on and so forth. And this is the problem that is faced in the great history of psychology, as well as in the great history of sociology, from everyone from Otto Rank to Freud to Marcuse to Becker. These are the fundamental problems of Western civilization, because Western civilization is an expansion and empirical construct of a way of being, which has now become indelibly a global way of being, by way of aggressively expanding structures of capitalism, which are themselves symbolic structures and social orders, as in a way of being in time. And we have to understand capitalism here is not primarily even economical, but in cosmological, because it is the way of conducting energy in space and in time. The perfection of capitalism is primarily a Western construct. And in so being distributed globally through global modernity, through the expansion of technological industrial modernity, it is the expansion of Western culture into and as a global order. And this is a power structure, because this is, again, the way in which reality is being constructed at a collective global nervous system level. This is the way that the human being experiences reality within the constraint of the world, which is being in time at any given moment in history. And this constraint expansion is unprecedented. It's the completion of the age of empires, so to speak. The projects of Alexander, Genghis Khan, the projects of Persia, the great empires of world history convene and converge upon this world moment, which was consolidated in the 20th century and into the 21st. In terms of the ethos, which is the structural, systematic way of being, the law order field, which is generated by Western civilization's perfection of capitalism, which could be argued to be fascism, which could be argued to be hyper-accelerated total economization of human being into economic, energetic units. Whatever that argument may be, it's not necessarily relevant for this discussion. The consolidation of this condition and dispersion of it in the technological industrial race for global political power is the condition that ends modernity and ends in modernity, which is that this symbolic and social order, this civilizational order, is now global. And I've talked about the expansion of the Silk Road into a global condition, and this is the latent potentiality within all human history, the latent potentiality even within the earth, again in terms of oil, which is the total harnessing at maximum capacity and maximum energetic thrust of latent thermodynamic thermonuclear information and leveraging that towards advancement in science, technology, and energetic production and consumption. So what we experience as hyperacceleration in this late period of the modern age of consolidation of technological and symbolic and social information across global borders and bounds into one interconnected global network is this hyperacceleration of energetic information, that it is being harvested and thrust forward with increasing exponential efficiency and brutality, as in ruthlessness, a pure economy of energetic production and consumption. And this is what the civilizational order is being radically transformed by. That the civilizational order, if we want to again gesture back to Moses and the Ten Commandments, is revealed to be through the 20th century, and this is the impact of everyone from Celine to Camus. This social order is revealed to be not a moral order, or even an order of the god of humanism, so to speak, or a god that recognizes humanity, but rather a Moloch. And this figure of the Moloch is extremely important because it's a feeding of life into the fire. A Moloch of energetic consumption and production, which is revealed through the hyperacceleration of industrial, technological, global modernity. And this acceleration is a stripping of the mask of the local code of a regulation out of necessity, which is to say, extreme energetic constraint. The condition of food, shelter, water globally has drastically increased over the past 100 years of industrial production and technological production for the globe. The quality of food, the quality of water, the availability of basic survival necessities has drastically increased, which has in turn drastically increased the global population. More human beings than ever before are surviving on the planet in numbers that are exponential since even the 1970s. Understanding this profound industrial technological transformation of the energetic availability, which is the continuation of life on Earth via basic thermodynamic constraint, we then understand the consequences of the falling apart, of the breaching of the civilizational law, which formerly was you could say, the blood barrier or the skin barrier, which held together local and even national networks, which by and via necessity were operating within extreme constraints and contracted states of information, which is to say very limited survival resources at any moment could be totally abolished into starvation and death. Even in many cases for those with the greatest power and influence in any of those social or tribal orders, which required a symbolic order, which is to say an order of information or a narrative of being in time, a cosmogony or cosmology, which fit and suited those energetic conditions, which regulated the gate structures of that collective civilization or community, so not only could it survive in time, but its linguistic and symbolic code, its entire culture, its entire reason and way of being could persist, and thus could survive as a seemingly independent unit in the face of a brutal, deconstructive nature down to the very skin and bones of the human being. Nonetheless, a social order which is itself an entire religious, creative, ideological, symbolic code, which is what human beings build across time that persists beyond a single lifespan. So this is a two-factor and a twofold equation. It is the continuation of the human being through the genomic project, which is simultaneously local in terms of a singular ancestry, a bloodline, or a genetic line, and global, which is to say the collective symbolic code or the social or cultural order by which those genomic structures persist. And this was formerly extremely local, extremely ethnically local. The explosion of this construct via thermodynamic expansion, which is the industrial technological order, over the 18th and 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries alone. This could even be isolated just to the 19th and 20th centuries alone, and even the 20th century alone. This massive spike in what could be described and mapped as the creation, an extrapolation of energetic chaos. This movement has created itself the moral problem of the transformation of civilization, and not only the transformation of civilization, but the transformation of human consciousness. Because this regulatory architecture, which is historically civilization, again, this code by which nervous systems operate and function in time, in synchrony, this code for metabolizing human energetic drives under conditions of collective persistence has been exploded by the global expansion of those conditions themselves. And not only that expansion, but the possibility, the energetic possibility within them. This is a further harvesting and harnessing of everything from lithium to oil to water, in the sense of artificial intelligence, which is scaling and scaffolding human capacity and thus is challenging and straining the social, moral, and civilizational codes, which themselves are private cosmologies or cosmogonies brought into conflict with one another. This is at the local level in terms of belief systems, which we experienced in the early 20th century in the United States with immigration, and we are experiencing to this day. But it is also global in the sense of World War I, World War II, and the existing world conflict, which is the opening of these civilizational gates, which were formerly constrained by space and time, and are coming into world order conflict by nature of the transmission and passage of information. Everything from the jet airplane to the submarine to the cell phone to the internet to artificial intelligence. It is the compression of space and time and the condensation of space and time into increasing immediacy, which then itself brings to bear existential conflicts of symbolic social orders with one another, which is to say cosmologies which are clashing by way of the underlying fundamental physical existential cosmic principle itself, which is persistence under constraint. The human being itself and its belief system of how and what that is and means in a veiled symbolic narrative way, and again, this is highly religious, which brings us back to Percy Shelley, is coming up against as in a frictive or tinder moment or flint moment with another formerly locally constrained belief system, as in the way of being. And these belief systems and ways of being, as is typical of the late 20th century, are revealed to be fundamentally meaningless or valueless. And this is, of course, predicted by Nietzsche at the end of the 19th century. So this loss of meaning and value, which is the loss of God in Nietzsche's terms, is the loss of belief in these regulatory architectures, which are not only, again, symbolic codes or ideologies or cosmogonies, but they are civilizations themselves. A religion itself historically has been a civilization. A religion itself historically has been a tribe. It is itself the way of being and the way of seeing being together. That the collapse of this order is an existential collapse of the first order, which is the order of the being itself in relation to cosmos, to being. It is a collapse of the ontos, which returns us to our fundamental principle at work here. And when this ontos collapses, it produces a chaos, And out from the opening of these tectonic plates, or the opening of the earth, so to speak, in an existential sense, which again returns us interestingly to Dante and the gates of hell, emerges the fundamental human drives: the sexual drive to create and procreate, the energetic drive to express oneself in whatever matter. Again, this is everything from the schizophrenic to the mystic. These modes of being themselves become increasingly available because the symbolic valence which formerly contained them within energetic gates, which are ultimately control gates, they're power gates of what information passes and what energy passes and why, which again returns us to the Strait of Hormuz. These gates are being broken open by the, again, in terms of persistence under constraint, their viability in the new constraint environment is now compromised. The stories they are telling, the actions they are taking are no longer confluent with the conditions that they themselves are emerging into, which is a new world order, or a phase change of human perception and human history, which is reducible to, fundamentally, again, thermodynamic constraint. Energetic, which is informational, which is also technological possibility. Condensation of space-time via technology, in the case of modernity. Again, the jet plane and the internet, or artificial intelligence. And so from this ground erupts the liberatory potentialities and possibilities which are manifest in Shelley's Prometheus Unbound, which is not only an unbinding of the human being civilizationally or socially via kings or ideological cuffs, constraints, or chains, which historically have ordered civilizations as they rise and fall, but the cosmological liberation of the energetic form out from under the appearance of human being. Because again, this is a thermodynamic crystal of information which is passed hand to hand via sexual reproduction over time. It is itself a energetic potentiality latent within the being that is carrying it, which is everything from neurological potentiality to imaginative potentiality, again, as in the brain and the body. The living somatic being, the organ system which is pumping blood, which is itself a thermodynamic relic and a crystal of transformation over time, which is itself a creative origin in the literal cosmogonical scientific foundations of the universe itself. So this is the freedom that Shelley is talking about, and this is the freedom that I am talking about in terms of the Renaissance mind and the potentiality and possibility of being communing with being at its utmost and fullmost heights. This is what all life is striving towards. It is existential striving towards revelation, which is unity of being. This is symbolized quite clearly in sexual intercourse, just as it is in the mystic state, which is a communion with God, historically. Ezekiel, Moses, this is the state of the prophet. And so this form of communion is utterly essential at the existential level, because being human is a cosmological problem. It's not a civilizational problem. It's not even a human problem. It's we could say, an alien problem, or a cosmological energetic problem of thermodynamic and thermonuclear transfusion of energy into forms, pseudo-stable forms. Whether that's the bushel of berries, or the human being, the bear, the tree. And this is understood quite well, particularly by Native American tribes, but also by the pagan mind the world over. The understanding of this unified coursing energy and what it means to be human within this. But this again is why we gesture back to the ontos and the transformation of the ontos via specialization in human history, particularly in modernity and Western civilization, that this specialization was necessary to form a deeper understanding of exactly what that one is, that monad is, that Spinozan or Leibnizian one or monad is. This understanding is common to the deepest human intuitions, whether those be mystical or scientific, and Isaac Newton formally is the bridge between the two, both in his work with alchemy and in his work with Newtonian physics, the laws of nature, because they are ultimately one and the same. That this is a transformation that is occurring, which is a perennial stripping away to this foundation. So this loss of the regulatory bound is what I've described as the blackening, which is the descent into fragmentation, isolation, and alienation, which is the transformation of the ontos, the formerly repressive borders and bounds of civilization, which themselves presupposed a working ontos, which then was taken for granted because it was functional by many, not by all. Again, the Renaissance mind refuses, it cannot accept a fragmented ontos, because the Renaissance mind is seeking communion with the existential cosmological being itself, which is always beyond the limit of civilization or the limit of culture, the limit of the presupposed human known. And this pursuit is the pursuit that emerges from, with increasing mass relevance and massive relevance, out from the cracks, the fragmentation, and the rupture of the civilizational ontos, and no more than in this moment in human history, when it is not only the civilizational ontos that is cracking, but the ontos of being human itself. So thank you. That's what I got.